שלא אחנו ברכו אמונה, יסבנו באותנו כדבר אדוני.
All right, so this afternoon, we're going to take a look at Parashat Emor. Parashat Emor, right in the middle of the book of Leviticus. And if you've been to this class before, you know we try and pick out something interesting from the Parsha, an interesting story, or a couple of lines, or even a couple of words that lead to interesting rabbinic commentary and maybe some new insights on the Parsha that we can relate to our lives. And I have an interesting story to present to you all from Parashat Emor today. Emor is mostly known for the laws that are given to the priests. And there's a section of Parashat Emor that deals with the holidays. We actually read from Parashat Emor almost every holiday. We're reading from this Parsha. But there's a little story in the 24th chapter that only takes up a few verses that is a fascinating story, interesting story, a story that seems to have a lot of missing information, and that makes for very interesting rabbinic commentary. Whenever we only have sort of the big details, the rabbis are going to pick up from the details that we've been given and sort of paint a bigger picture for us on what really could be going on the background that maybe the Torah doesn't let us into. So I'm going to share my screen. Now I'm at home now, so sometimes when I share my screen, I've had issues. So everyone say a prayer that the share screen will work. Okay, can you give me a thumbs up? All right, our prayers worked. Leviticus chapter 24:10. Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit. I'll just read in English to make it easier for everyone. There came out among the Israelites a man whose mother was Israelite and whose father was Egyptian. And a fight broke out in the camp between that half Israelite and a certain Israelite man. So far we have a fight that's broken out between two people, and all we know about the two people is that one is a half Jew, Jewish only by the mother. So actually today he would be a full Jew, but in the time of the Bible, that was not yet the law, right? The law was it traveled by the father, it was still patriarchal in the time of the Bible. Here, the man is called a half Israelite. The Hebrew is Ben HaYisraelit, the son of a Jewish woman. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name in blasphemy, and he was brought to Moses. So something happened in the course of that fight where the half Jew said God's name in blasphemy and was brought to Moses. And now we're given some other information about this unknown half Jew, his mother's name. His mother's name was Shlomit, the daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan. So we don't know his name, but we know his mother's name, Shlomit bat Divri, and that she came from the tribe of Dan. And he was placed in custody until the decision of the Lord should be made clear to them. So Moses, right, is sitting there in judgment. This half-Jew was brought to Moses because he did something terrible. He pronounced God's name in blasphemy. But Moses does not issue a judgment. Verse 12 says he was placed in custody until the decision of the Lord should be made clear to them. So Moses didn't know what to do, it seems, and he needed God to give him advice on exactly how to handle this. So is everyone with me with the information we know and the much more substantial information that we don't know? about what actually is going on here. We know there's a Jew. We know there's a half-Jew. We know they got into a fight. We know that the half-Jew said God's name in blasphemy. We know that he was brought before Moses. We know that Moses didn't really know how to handle it. And we know that his name was the son of Shalomit bat Divri, right? And then the story continues. God says, this guy did something really bad. You got to take him out and end his life with some stones. But that's not the interesting part. That's the challenging part. The interesting part is how the rabbis try and figure out exactly what happened here. So today, I always try to do this in a half hour. We're going to look at three interesting interpretations. One from the Midrash, tries to fill in the blank. One from Rashi, who quotes the Talmud. That's the second one. And the third is a modern take on this story that I found fascinating. We'll read it together. Let's start with the take of the Midrash. How does the Midrash understand what happened here? What you're going to see is, since the only information we are given on this half-Israelite is his mother's name, Shalomit bat Divri, the rabbis use her name to try and figure out something about the case. Maybe her name reveals something about what's really going on here. I'm going to share my screen again. Here is the Midrash, Vayikra Rabba. V'shem imo Shlomit bat Divri lematei Dan. We know that his mother's name was Shlomit, the daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan. She was called Shalomit because, as Rabbi Levi said, she was very free with her greetings to men, saying shalom to you and shalom to you. And Bat Divri, why was she called Bat Divri? Because she brought destruction, dever, on her son. Look what the Midrash is saying here. Shlomit Bat Divri. Her name, Shalomit. Well, that sounds like shalom. So maybe his mother was a little too friendly with the people around town. She was talking too much. Hello to you, hello to you. She was a neglectful mother. Didn't have time for her son, busy chit-chatting with other people in the town, and she brought dever on her son. And this is a very interesting read because if you think about it, it explains why the boy's name is not mentioned. The half-Israelite boy's name is not mentioned, but her name is. Because that doesn't make sense, right? He's the one who's guilty. He blasphemed God's name. Why isn't his name mentioned? Why only his mother? So this explains why. Now, a feminist would hate this, but the feminist will like the later one. So bear with me. We'll like the third interpretation. I hope we'll like the third interpretation. But this one is very anti-woman. I don't know if it's intentionally anti-woman, but it almost takes the blame off the son and blames entirely the mother and turns her into an unattentive mother simply because of her name. And the problem is later in the story, she's not punished. Only he is. But maybe that is her punishment. That is, she is the one being punished because she has to see her son get stoned. And really, she's at fault. So in the nature versus nurture argument, right, on children, I've seen how this midrash is used to say, be careful. Who we are as parents impacts positively and negatively on our children. And sometimes we end up being the ones paying the price for our bad parenting later on as our children make mistakes in life. So he is absolved of the responsibility, the half-Israelite, and she claims that responsibility in this read. What I don't love about this midrash is it doesn't help me understand what the fight was about. Remember, the half Israelite was fighting with a full Israelite. What do you think they were fighting about? It's not clear. Maybe the mother had something to do with this fight. Maybe the full Israelite was saying, your mother, is a town flirt and keeps going around to all these people, and you should control your mother. And then he fought back. I don't know, but somehow she becomes primarily implicated in the story, according to the Midrash. Rashi is sadly not all that kinder. Look what Rashi says. Shemi mo Shlomit bat Divri. We know his mother's name was Shlomit bat Divri. Shivchan shel Yisrael shepirsema hakatuv lezo, lomar shehi levada haita zona. It is to praise Israel that her name was publicized, to say that she, and only she, was a harlot. I wonder how much of this is being is Shlomit bat Divri being blamed for having the relationship with the Egyptian man in the first place? What is Rashi saying? Why is her name mentioned and not the son? Why is the son's name protected and her name mentioned? It's to show that she was not like everybody else. Shivchan shel Yisrael means to protect the dignity of everybody else in the camp, who was, of course, pure and perfect. Her name was mentioned just to single her out as a bad egg. Rashi again blames the mother. In another passage, Rashi says she was a dabranit, just like the Midrash, ledaber. She's a talker. She talked too much, just like the Midrash says, and didn't give her son the attention that her son needed. And sadly, her son turns into a blasphemer because he didn't have a good mother. Now, I hope you're reading these passages and you're uncomfortable. This poor woman, who knows how she ended up in the relationship with an Egyptian man? Who knows why her son became a blasphemer and got into this fight in the first place? Is it really fair? I understand the Torah leaves out a lot of the bulk of the story, but is it really fair for her to take all the blame? How much of this is just good old-fashioned woman hating coming from male-centered tradition? So let me try and redeem this story for you with an interesting take on the story by a professor of Midrash at the Hebrew Union College named Wendy Zerler. Wendy Zerler tries to redeem Shlomit bat Divri, and we're going to read this passage together. I'm going to share my screen again with you so that we can do that. Does everyone see the text? Okay. How is it that in the case of the son of Shlomit bat Divri, the effort to speak goes so terribly wrong? Building on the rabbi's desire for a credible backstory to explain this cryptic, troubling tale, I'd like to offer my own backstory about Shlomit bat Divri and the son she bore with an Egyptian man. The terse narrative of the Bible offers us no details on how this son came to be born and raised within the tribe of Dan. It is because of this lack of context that some of the Midrashic authors supply accounts of harlotry. But given the context of an Israelite enslavement in Egypt, is it not possible that Shlomit, like so many African American slaves who were raped and impregnated by their masters, might have been abused and used by a slave master or overseer? And that is how she came to give birth to the son of an Egyptian man. Isn't that an interesting introduction here to the rest of the story she's going to tell? Pay close attention to what she's saying. The rabbis go after her. Why? Because we know she had a relationship with an Egyptian man. But Rabbi Zierler says, why would it not be equally plausible that the relationship with an Egyptian man wasn't because she was a harlot or a talker, but because they just came out of Egypt? And just like African American slaves were often impregnated by their slave masters, why would it be so ridiculous to think that some Jewish women were bearing the children of their Egyptian taskmasters similarly? Now, Shlomit Bat Divri doesn't become a harlot. She becomes a victim of the unfortunate circumstance of her people. She's now a much more sensitive character. She is a single mother. Let's go on and keep reading. According to this reading, Shlomit Bat Divri was a struggling ex-slave and single mother who labored against all odds to raise her son and shield him from the prejudices of the surrounding community. Alas, the son, whom the text presents as a ben, a son or boy, rather than an ish, a man, hinting perhaps at his not yet or barely emergent manhood, went out of his mother's tent and discovered that the world around him was not what he expected. He saw that he was a second-class citizen in a society of former second-class citizens, that he was not wanted among his would-be brethren. His mother may have attempted to counter and to diffuse his youthful anger when it flared. Befitting her name, Shlomit, from shalom, peace, she may have tried on any number of occasions to bring peace and calm and to shore up her son's bifurcated identity. I love this. I don't know what you think of it, but I love this. Finally, we have a good explanation as to why the fight emerged between the half-Israelite and the full Israelite. The text begins with Vayetze. He went out. The child, the half-Jew, went out. And what does he discover when he goes out? That all the other kids are making fun of him because he's not fully Jewish like them. He's only half Jewish. He has a different lineage. His father was Egyptian. And his mother is not Shalomit because she's saying shalom to everybody and yapping and flirting with everybody in the neighborhood. She's Shlomit, the one who tries to bring peace to the situation, to calm her son down, to talk to him and build his self-confidence, even though he has a bit of a different identity than everybody else. But when Ish HaYisraeli, the full-fledged man of Israel, told her son that he didn't belong, and when Moses ruled that the son's status as a perpetual outsider was ordained by God, the son succumbed to rage and cursed the God who had banished him from his assumed place among the Israelites. As Bat Divri, a daughter of speech, Shlomit may have endeavored, just like the daughters of Slavhad, to speak up, defend her son, and demand justice for him. But tragically, she failed in her bid to save them. I think this midrash gets better and better. Now, not only do we have a reason for why the fight broke out, but we have a reason for why he blasphemed God. Why would somebody, a half-Jew who's fighting with a full Jew, why would he need to blaspheme God? Let him just put on his boxing gloves and knock the other guy out. But now we have an explanation for why he blasphemed God, because he was part of a community that saw him as second class. And the reason they saw him as second class is because of these rules of genealogy, because of a covenant that passes through the parents and he didn't get a fair piece of that covenant. And so the other kids make fun of him. Isn't this relatable? Now you think of today, the struggles of patrilineal Jews and other Jews who don't really feel a part of the community, Jews of color, marginalized Jews. And it's one thing, step one is you get angry at the people around you, but step two is you get angry at the whole tradition. You get angry at God. How could God do this to me? Make me feel like I don't belong. Now we have a plausible reason for why the half Israelite gets into a fight and why he ends up blaspheming God. The last piece, which is where I think this midrash really shines. Why did Moses not know what to do? Why did Moses freeze? Why wasn't he able to pronounce a punishment? Why did he need God's advice? All of you psychologists here are gonna love this. My effort to rehabilitate the mother of a blaspheming son may read like a blasphemy in its own right, but I would argue that this story ought to be read not as the triumphalist eradication of the sacrilegious alien, but as a full-blown tragedy. I say this bearing in mind another story of a son with a complex background who committed a capital offense and not only was rehabilitated, but was even chosen as the leader of his people. I'm speaking, of course, of Moses, who was born to an Israelite woman and raised as an Egyptian, and who, like Shlomit bat Divri's son, went out to his brothers. That word vayetze appears in the first chapter of Exodus, where Moses goes out to his brothers and in so doing fell into no small amount of trouble. Moses' early adulthood likewise included a fight between an Egyptian and a Hebrew. In his case, an Egyptian taskmaster and a Hebrew slave. Do you all remember that story? Moses goes out to his brethren and sees the fight between the Egyptian taskmaster and a slave, and Moses ends up slaying the Egyptian taskmaster. Moses ends up siding with the Hebrew and killing the Egyptian. This action threatens his standing not only in the Egyptian community, but also among the Hebrews. The next day, when he goes out and sees two Hebrews fighting, and the word nitzim, which means fighting, is the same verb that appears here, the Hebrews do not welcome his intervention. One of them says, Mi samcha la'ish sar v'shofet, who appointed you as a man who is chief and ruler over us? The Hebrew man's refusal to recognize Moses as a man highlights Moses' youth, and his failure to acknowledge Moses as a leader emphasizes his outsider status. Let me skip this paragraph. Moses recognizes himself in Shlomit's son. Is it possible that if Moses is initially confused as to how to respond to this incident of blasphemy and is thus forced to consult with the Lord, it is because he recognizes in this story of an unnamed, half Egyptian, half Israelite son, his own story of a mixed Hebrew-Egyptian upbringing, of going out and winding up in a fight that goes very wrong? Is it possible that Moses sees the violence of his own past in this half-Egyptian and finds himself caught between a sense of empathy, and the need to protect the honor of God? Now, this is a take on the story that I can only describe as delicious. Delicious. It's that sensitive and that good. We know why they got into a fight. There's no anti-woman bent here trying to destroy the name of Shlomit bat Dibri. There's an explanation for why God's name was blasphemed in the course of this fight. And what ties it all together? Moses's lack of lack of ability to judge this case when it comes before him, explained by textual similarities that reveal a connection to his own background. Moses also, he may not have been half Egyptian, but you could almost say that he was raised by a different family, by an Egyptian family, and never was accepted. And we have hints in the Torah that he was never really accepted fully, especially in his youth, as an equal Hebrew. And that makes sense. He was a prince. This is a group of slaves. How could they see any relationship, any brotherhood in somebody who's from a palace? How could they see their suffering in his experience? So Moses looks at this half Israelite, half Egyptian, sees himself in the struggles of this young man, and does not want to punish him because he is personally, emotionally invested through his own story in what is going on with this young man, and needs God, the impartial third party, to intervene to help him figure out what to do. Shlomit Bat Ivri was not a harlot. She was not some chit-chatter flirt with everybody in town. She was called Shlomit Bat Divri because shalom, she tried to bring peace to a situation. She tried to comfort her son. Then she tried to speak up for her son when her son went before Moses. She used her dibri. Remember a couple of weeks ago we did Lashon Hara in Parashat Tazria Metzora? So she is Shlomit, the daughter of speech, because she tried to use her speech to bring peace to a complicated situation. And you might say that she is not the villain, but the real hero of this story. There we go, half an hour. Thanks, everyone. I hope you learned something about Parashat Emor, a story in just a few verses that if you just pay close attention to and dig up some midrash on, I think has some beautiful lessons, important lessons for us, and that helps us appreciate some of the subtleties of the Torah that can really help refine our characters and aim us to higher and better places in our own lives. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.